Welcome to Warriors of the World. Today we'll be exploring Blackbeard, the most infamous pirate in history. Subscribe now to join our community and support this project. Now, let's begin. The early 18th century marked the golden age of piracy, a brief but extraordinary era when pirates ruled the shipping lanes of the Caribbean and Atlantic. Among the hundreds who flew the Black Flag, one man stands above all others in infamy and legend: Edward Teach, better known as Blackbeard. His name alone was enough to make seasoned sailors surrender without firing a shot, and 3 centuries later, his image defines what most people imagine when they think of pirates. Little is known with certainty about Edward Teach before he embraced piracy. Most historians believe he was born around 1680 in Bristol, England, a bustling port city with strong connections to the Atlantic trade networks. His literacy and occasional displays of gentlemanly behavior suggest he came from a respectable middle-class family rather than the criminal underworld that produced many pirates. Teach likely began his maritime career as a privateer during the War of Spanish Succession, when Britain issued letters of marque authorizing private vessels to attack French and Spanish shipping. Under this legal form of piracy, Teach would have learned the tactics of ship-to-ship combat and gained intimate knowledge of Caribbean waterways and shipping routes. When the war ended in 1713, thousands of privateers suddenly found themselves unemployed, with valuable naval skills but few legitimate opportunities. Many, including Teach, turned to outright piracy. The earliest reliable records place Teach aboard the pirate sloop of Benjamin Hornigold, a notorious pirate operating out of Nassau in the Bahamas, which had become a pirate republic where thousands of outlaws established a rough self-governing community. Under Hornigold's mentorship, Teach quickly distinguished himself through his courage, tactical acumen, and natural leadership. By 1717, Hornigold recognized Teach's potential and gave him command of a captured sloop, launching the career of history's most notorious pirate. What made Teach unique was his understanding that fear itself could be a weapon more powerful than cannons. It was during this early command period that Edward Teach transformed himself into Blackbeard, crafting an image so terrifying that his mere reputation could win battles before they began. This calculated metamorphosis from obscure sailor to pirate legend would prove to be Blackbeard's true genius. Blackbeard understood something fundamental about piracy that many of his contemporaries missed. Successful pirates minimized violent confrontation. Every battle risked valuable lives and damaged precious ships that were difficult to repair in the makeshift facilities available to outlaws. The ideal pirate raid ended with a merchant ship surrendering immediately, its crew unharmed, and its cargo intact. To achieve this, Blackbeard embarked on one of history's most successful psychological warfare campaigns. He cultivated a terrifying appearance designed to make victims surrender without resistance. His most famous innovation was his enormous black beard, which he grew until it reached below his chest. Before battle, he would twist hemp fuses into this massive beard and light them, surrounding his face with crackling sparks and sulphurous smoke, creating the impression of a demon emerged from hell. His wardrobe enhanced this demonic image. He dressed in dark clothing and wore multiple pistols in leather harnesses crossed over his chest, along with daggers and a cutlass at his belt. Contemporary accounts describe him entering battle with 6 pistols, creating a walking arsenal that could deliver multiple shots without reloading. The flag flying from his ship, the Queen Anne's Revenge, reinforced this carefully crafted image of terror. It depicted a skeleton holding an hourglass in one hand, indicating that time was running out for his victims, and in the other hand, the skeleton held a spear pointing at a bleeding heart. The message was clear: surrender or die. Blackbeard supplemented this visual terror with carefully staged behavior. When capturing ships, he would sometimes lock himself in his cabin, burning mixtures of sulfur and other chemicals to fill the space with choking smoke. Then he would emerge from this hellish cloud, eyes reddened, coughing and sputtering flames, to confront captives who were already paralyzed with fear from tales they had heard. During negotiations, he would occasionally fire his pistols beneath the table or suddenly slash at his own crew with his cutlass, creating an impression of unpredictable madness that made victims eager to comply with his demands. This psychological strategy proved remarkably effective. Ship after ship surrendered to Blackbeard without resistance, simply on the strength of his fearsome reputation. His theatrical approach to piracy not only preserved his resources but created the legendary status that still surrounds him 3 centuries later. In November 1717, Blackbeard's career reached a turning point when he and Hornigold captured a large French slave ship named La Concorde near the Caribbean island of Martinique. Hornigold, who had recently accepted a royal pardon and retired from piracy, handed the prize to his protégé. Blackbeard renamed her the Queen Anne's Revenge, creating the vessel that would become as legendary as the pirate himself. The Queen Anne's Revenge represented a massive upgrade from the small sloops pirates typically commanded. At 100 feet in length and weighing over 300 tons, she was a formidable warship that could intimidate any merchant vessel and stand against naval patrols. Originally built in England, she had served as a privateer named the Concorde before being captured by the French and converted to the slave trade. Blackbeard immediately set about modifying his new flagship for piracy. He increased her armament from the original 14 guns to 40 cannon, making her one of the most heavily armed vessels in the Americas. This firepower came from smaller vessels he captured, essentially creating a floating fortress by cannibalizing the weapons from his prizes. The ship's size allowed Blackbeard to greatly expand his crew, eventually commanding between 150 and 300 men aboard the Queen Anne's Revenge. This large crew enabled him to capture and manage multiple prize vessels simultaneously while maintaining enough fighting strength to overcome resistance. Life aboard Blackbeard's flagship defied the romantic notions promoted by modern films. The ship was cramped, filthy, and disease-ridden. Fresh water was strictly rationed. The diet consisted mainly of salt beef, hardtack biscuits, and rum. Discipline was maintained through a combination of charismatic leadership and brutal punishment. Yet compared to conditions aboard merchant or naval vessels of the era, pirate ships offered better food, more democratic governance, and fairer distribution of profits, explaining why many sailors willingly joined pirate crews. The Queen Anne's Revenge served as Blackbeard's flagship for less than a year, but during this brief period, she transformed him from one of many pirates operating in the Caribbean to the most feared man on the Atlantic. Ultimately, the massive vessel proved to be both Blackbeard's greatest asset and, as we shall see, a contributing factor to his eventual downfall. With the formidable Queen Anne's Revenge as his flagship, Blackbeard embarked on the most successful phase of his pirate career, capturing vessel after vessel to build a small pirate fleet. His operating pattern demonstrated sophisticated strategy. He used smaller, faster sloops to chase and capture prizes, while the heavily armed Queen Anne's Revenge served as a command vessel and intimidating presence that could be brought forward if merchants showed signs of resistance. By early 1718, Blackbeard commanded a fleet of 4 vessels with over 300 men under his authority. This force was powerful enough to blockade entire colonial ports, an unprecedented level of power for a pirate captain. His lieutenants included Israel Hands, Robert Deal, and the colorful Steed Bonnet, a former gentleman plantation owner who had abandoned his family and wealth for the pirate life but proved so incompetent that Blackbeard essentially took control of his ship while allowing Bonnet to maintain the illusion of independent command. The effectiveness of Blackbeard's operation stemmed from more than just firepower. He developed an extensive intelligence network through which he obtained information about shipping schedules, cargoes, and naval patrols. Corrupt colonial officials, crooked merchants, and sympathetic sailors in legitimate service provided vital data that allowed him to select the most valuable targets while avoiding military threats. Blackbeard's fleet primarily targeted merchant vessels carrying manufactured goods, textiles, cocoa, sugar, and spices, as these high-value cargoes were easy to sell through black market channels. Contrary to popular belief, he rarely sought gold or silver, as these were typically transported aboard heavily armed treasure galleons that even Blackbeard preferred to avoid. Practical commodities like medicine, food, naval supplies, and fine clothing for his officers constituted the majority of his prizes. Unlike the sadistic pirates of fiction, Blackbeard generally avoided unnecessary violence during his raids. Captains who surrendered promptly were usually treated with relative courtesy, and crews were often released unharmed after their vessels were looted. This calculated restraint was not born of compassion but pragmatic strategy. Excessive cruelty would have made future victims more likely to resist desperately, knowing they had nothing to lose. Nevertheless, Blackbeard balanced this relative moderation with occasional displays of strategic brutality. When he encountered resistance or suspected deception, he could be merciless. In one documented incident, he tortured a merchant who he believed was hiding valuables by tying lighted matches between the man's fingers until they burned down to the flesh. Such calculated atrocities enhanced his terrifying reputation while remaining rare enough that surrender remained an attractive option for most of his targets. The pinnacle of Blackbeard's power was demonstrated in May 1718, when he executed one of the most audacious acts in pirate history: the complete blockade of Charleston, South Carolina, the most important port in British North America. This operation revealed not just Blackbeard's naval capabilities but his strategic thinking and political acumen. Using his fleet of 4 vessels led by the Queen Anne's Revenge, Blackbeard positioned his forces at the entrance to Charleston Harbor, effectively cutting off the bustling colonial port from the outside world. Over the course of 1 week, he captured every vessel attempting to enter or leave the harbor, accumulating 9 prizes and dozens of hostages, including prominent merchants and government officials. Rather than simply plundering these vessels, Blackbeard used the situation to address a critical need. His crew was suffering from medical problems, likely including venereal diseases common among pirates. Charleston had medicines but no incentive to provide them to outlaws. By holding prominent citizens hostage, Blackbeard created leverage to demand what he needed. His ransom demand was remarkably specific, a medicine chest worth about 300 pounds, a substantial but not outrageous sum. He dispatched a party of pirates with several hostages into Charleston to deliver his terms, giving the town authorities just 2 days to comply before he would execute his prisoners and destroy the captured vessels. The colonial government, lacking any naval forces capable of challenging Blackbeard's fleet, promptly delivered the medicine chest. True to his word, Blackbeard released all his hostages unharmed, though he kept their valuables, clothing, and even their ships. Before departing, he also had the remarkable audacity to send a message to the governor stating that he would visit Charleston again if the medicines proved ineffective. The Charleston blockade demonstrated the astounding fact that a single pirate commander could paralyze a major colonial port for days, facing no effective resistance from one of Britain's most prosperous colonies. It represented the high water mark of Golden Age piracy, a moment when the world's most powerful empire found itself helpless against criminal forces operating from its imperial margins. For Blackbeard personally, the blockade cemented his legendary status but likely contributed to his downfall by making his elimination a priority for British authorities. After so public a humiliation, colonial officials and the Royal Navy would spare no expense to bring him down. Blackbeard's greatest triumph thus contained the seeds of his ultimate destruction. Just weeks after the triumphant blockade of Charleston, Blackbeard's career took a mysterious turn that continues to puzzle historians. While navigating the shallow waters of Beaufort Inlet on the North Carolina coast, the Queen Anne's Revenge and a smaller sloop in his fleet ran aground on a sandbar. Despite ideal weather conditions and Blackbeard's extensive experience in these waters, both vessels were lost. The circumstances were suspicious enough that many historians believe Blackbeard deliberately grounded his flagship as part of a calculated strategy to reduce his crew size and consolidate his plunder. Prior to the incident, he had transferred valuable cargo and his trusted lieutenants to his remaining vessels. After the grounding, he abandoned 40 crew members on a deserted island and sailed away with a hand-picked crew and the majority of accumulated treasure. This apparent betrayal aligned with significant changes occurring in the pirate world. The British government had offered a general pardon to pirates who surrendered before September 1, 1718, as part of a campaign to reduce piracy in colonial waters. Many notorious pirates, including Benjamin Hornigold, were accepting these pardons and retiring from piracy. Blackbeard, sensing changing winds, sailed to Bath, North Carolina, where he met with Governor Charles Eden and accepted a royal pardon in June 1718. On paper at least, Edward Teach was now a reformed man, promising to abandon piracy and live as a legitimate citizen of the colony. Few believed this conversion was genuine, least of all the pirates he had abandoned. Governor Eden, however, welcomed the infamous pirate to North Carolina. Eden's motivations remain debated by historians, with some suggesting simple intimidation, while others point to evidence of corruption and possible profit-sharing arrangements between the governor and the supposedly reformed pirate. Blackbeard purchased a house in Bath and for a brief period lived as something approaching a respectable citizen. He even married a local woman, believed to be his 14th wife, as he had a habit of acquiring new brides in various ports without bothering to end previous marriages. Local legend holds that the governor himself officiated at this wedding ceremony. Despite his official rehabilitation, Blackbeard maintained his fearsome appearance and continued associating with known pirates. He kept his flagship, a sloop now renamed Adventure, fully armed and crewed by men suspiciously similar to his former pirate companions. Within months, the veneer of legitimacy would wear thin, as reports emerged of vessels once again being plundered off the Carolina coast by a captain with a distinctively large black beard. Despite his royal pardon, Blackbeard rapidly returned to piracy, operating under the unofficial protection of corrupt North Carolina officials. This arrangement created one of history's early examples of state-sponsored criminal enterprise, with Governor Charles Eden and his secretary Tobias Knight providing legal cover for Blackbeard's continued activities. The corrupt system operated with remarkable openness. In August 1718, Blackbeard captured a French merchant vessel, claiming to have found it abandoned at sea. Under maritime salvage laws, such derelict vessels could legally be claimed by their discoverers. Governor Eden's court quickly declared the ship a legitimate prize and awarded Blackbeard salvage rights, despite the suspicious circumstances and protests from the vessel's rightful owners. The captured cargo, primarily sugar and cocoa, was divided between Blackbeard and colonial officials. Documents later discovered in Secretary Knight's home revealed detailed accounting of these ill-gotten profits. This corrupt arrangement provided Blackbeard with legal protection while enriching the colonial administration. Using Ocracoke Inlet as his base of operations, Blackbeard preyed on shipping along the American coast while maintaining the fiction of being a reformed pirate. The isolated islands of North Carolina's Outer Banks provided perfect hiding places, with shallow channels that large naval vessels couldn't navigate and a maze-like geography that only local pilots could safely traverse. The scale of Blackbeard's operations during this period was smaller than his previous Caribbean campaigns. He now commanded only a single vessel, the Adventure, with a crew of about 20 trusted men rather than the hundreds who had served under him during his fleet operations. This reduced force focused on smaller merchant vessels unlikely to offer resistance or attract major attention. Blackbeard's semi-legitimate status created problems for his victims. When merchant captains reported being plundered by a man matching Blackbeard's distinctive appearance, they found no recourse in North Carolina's courts, which were controlled by his allies. This corruption effectively turned portions of British North America into a pirate haven under governmental protection. News of this arrangement soon reached neighboring Virginia, where Governor Alexander Spotswood viewed Blackbeard's continued activities with alarm. Spotswood had invested heavily in Virginia shipping ventures that were now targets for Blackbeard's raids. Moreover, he recognized that allowing a notorious pirate to operate with impunity undermined British authority throughout the colonies. Despite questionable legal jurisdiction, Spotswood resolved to end Blackbeard's career permanently, setting in motion the final chapter of the infamous pirate's life. By autumn 1718, Blackbeard's protected status in North Carolina had become intolerable to Virginia's Governor Alexander Spotswood. Despite lacking clear legal authority to pursue a pardoned pirate operating from a neighboring colony, Spotswood launched a military expedition to capture or kill Blackbeard, whom he described in official correspondence as a well-known pirate who continued to commit many acts of piracy despite his pardon. Spotswood's chosen instrument for this mission was Lieutenant Robert Maynard of the Royal Navy. Maynard was an experienced naval officer commanding HMS Pearl, but the ship's deep draft prevented it from navigating the shallow channels of North Carolina's Outer Banks where Blackbeard lurked. Spotswood therefore chartered 2 civilian sloops, Ranger and Jane, which were placed under Maynard's command and manned by volunteers from the Pearl and another Royal Navy vessel. The expedition departed on November 17, 1718, with about 50 men divided between the 2 sloops. Operating on intelligence that Blackbeard was anchored near Ocracoke Island, Maynard navigated the treacherous channels of the Outer Banks, demonstrating considerable skill in bringing his vessels into position for an attack. Blackbeard, despite his reputation for vigilance, appears to have been caught off guard. The night before Maynard's arrival, the pirate had hosted a raucous drinking party aboard his sloop Adventure, with guests including local smugglers and corrupt officials. Many accounts suggest he and his crew were suffering from significant hangovers when lookouts spotted Maynard's approaching vessels on the morning of November 22. Initially, Blackbeard was unconcerned, believing the approaching sloops were merchant vessels and potential prizes. Even when informed they were likely military vessels, he remained confident in his ability to outfight or outmaneuver any threat in these familiar waters. When called upon to surrender by Maynard's approaching forces, Blackbeard reportedly replied with defiance and profanity, vowing to give no quarter and expect none in return. As Maynard's sloops approached through the shallow channel, Blackbeard used his intimate knowledge of local waters to set an ambush. He deliberately grounded the Adventure on a sandbar, forcing Maynard's vessels to navigate carefully toward him while the pirates prepared their defense with loaded cannons and small arms. The stage was set for one of the most famous naval battles in pirate history, a confrontation between the most notorious pirate of the Golden Age and a determined naval officer willing to risk everything to bring him to justice. The Battle of Ocracoke Inlet began at dawn on November 22, 1718, as Lieutenant Maynard's 2 sloops approached Blackbeard's anchored vessel. The pirates' initial cannon volley proved devastatingly effective, killing several of Maynard's men aboard the Ranger and causing significant damage to both attacking vessels. Maynard, facing a superior position and Blackbeard's deadly accurate cannon fire, employed a brilliant tactical deception. He ordered most of his men below decks while he remained visible on deck with just 2 others. From Blackbeard's vantage point, it appeared the cannon fire had killed or wounded most of the attacking force, creating an irresistible opportunity to board and finish off the survivors. Blackbeard fell directly into the trap. With a shout of, "Damnation seize my soul if I give you quarter or take any from you," he led his crew in boarding Maynard's vessel, the Jane. As the pirates swarmed aboard, Maynard ordered his hidden men to emerge from below decks, creating a sudden overwhelming force that caught the pirates by surprise. The ensuing hand-to-hand combat was brutal and chaotic. Blackbeard fought with his characteristic ferocity, armed with multiple pistols, a cutlass, and his fearsome appearance. He directly engaged Maynard in what one witness described as a most obstinate and bloody conflict. Blackbeard fired a pistol at Maynard, who returned fire. Then both men resorted to slashing at each other with swords as the battle raged around them. Blackbeard proved nearly unstoppable, absorbing multiple gunshot wounds while continuing to fight. Historical accounts claim he received 5 gunshot wounds and more than 20 severe cuts before finally falling. Even as he attempted to cock another pistol, a sailor struck him across the neck with a sword, nearly severing his head. According to legend, Blackbeard's headless body swam around the ship 3 times before sinking, though this fanciful detail is clearly posthumous embellishment. The battle lasted less than 30 minutes but resulted in extraordinary casualties. Of Blackbeard's crew of 18 men, only 2 survived. Maynard lost about 10 men with 24 wounded. Maynard later wrote that Blackbeard fell with 25 wounds, 5 of them being shot wounds. The lieutenant took Blackbeard's severed head and hung it from his ship's bowsprit as proof of his victory and as a warning to other pirates. The surviving pirates were taken to Virginia for trial, where most were convicted and hanged. When Governor Spotswood searched the captured adventure, he discovered incriminating letters proving the corruption of North Carolina officials, particularly Secretary Tobias Knight, who had been receiving payments from Blackbeard. This evidence of official collusion with piracy created a colonial scandal but resulted in few consequences for the implicated officials. Lieutenant Maynard returned to Virginia with Blackbeard's severed head hanging from his bowsprit as a grim trophy. Governor Spotswood had the skull mounted on a tall pole at the entrance to Hampton Roads Harbor, where it remained for years as a warning to those considering piracy. Eventually, the elements reduced it to a bare skull, which allegedly was removed and made into the base of a silver drinking cup used at the Raleigh Tavern in Williamsburg. The death of Blackbeard marked a turning point in the golden age of piracy. Within 5 years, most major pirate captains had been killed or captured as colonial governments and naval forces intensified their anti-piracy campaigns. The Romantic era of Caribbean piracy that had flourished in the early 18th century was effectively extinguished by 1725. Blackbeard left behind surprisingly little confirmed treasure. Despite legends of buried riches, his actual estate consisted primarily of sugar, cocoa, and cotton goods seized from merchant vessels. Unlike the fictional pirates of later literature, real Golden Age pirates typically spent their plunder quickly on alcohol, gambling, and prostitutes rather than accumulating vast hoards. Any substantial wealth Blackbeard acquired was likely distributed among his crew or spent during his brief periods ashore. What did survive was Blackbeard's legend. Within months of his death, Captain Charles Johnson published A General History of the Pirates, which included a detailed account of Blackbeard's career that mixed factual reporting with colorful embellishments. This influential work established Blackbeard as the archetypal pirate in the public imagination, a status he has maintained for 3 centuries. Archaeological discoveries have added tangible dimensions to the Blackbeard legend. In 1996, the wreck of a vessel believed to be the Queen Anne's Revenge was discovered off the coast of North Carolina. Subsequent excavations have recovered cannons, anchors, navigational instruments, and thousands of artifacts that provide unprecedented insights into life aboard a pirate flagship. The medical instruments found among the wreckage corroborate accounts of Blackbeard's demand for a medicine chest during the Charleston blockade. Beyond historical interest, Blackbeard remains a powerful cultural icon, appearing in countless books, films, and television programs. His distinctive image, with flame-wreathed beard and pistols across his chest, has become shorthand for piracy itself. From Robert Louis Stevenson's Treasure Island to the Pirates of the Caribbean film franchise, virtually all fictional pirates owe something to the legend of Blackbeard. Perhaps the most enduring aspect of Blackbeard's legacy is how he elevated piracy from mere criminal activity to psychological warfare and personal branding. His understanding that fear itself could be a weapon more effective than cannons demonstrated a psychological sophistication far ahead of his time. In creating the Blackbeard persona, Edward Teach achieved a form of immortality that has long outlived his brief, violent career on the high seas. Subscribe now, become a member, turn on notifications, share this video with your friends, and leave a comment so we can compare our knowledge and sources. Thank you for following our channel. Until our next strategic journey, here at Warriors of the World.